Welcome in, everyone, ready to dive deep into atomic habits. We're cracking open James Clear's book, and let me tell you, it's not your average self-help fluff.
It really isn't. Atomic Habits is more like, well, a deep dive into the science behind habits.
Exactly. It even gets into things like psychology and neurology. We're
Huh.
talking about the why behind our actions, not just surface-level tips, but the actual mechanics of how we form habit.
And that's what makes it so powerful, right? It's about understanding the how and why so you can actually change your behavior.
Right. So we're going way beyond just think positive. One of the things that really struck me was Clear's emphasis on compounding. It's like this secret weapon for self-improvement, don't you think?
I'd say so. It's the idea that small, tiny improvements done consistently lead to huge gains over time.
Like huge.
Yeah. Think of it like investing. A small amount of money invested consistently grows into a fortune thanks to compound interest.
Oh, that's a good way to put it. And Clear uses his own life as an example. I mean, he had that awful injury, right? And he focused on those small wins every day during his recovery.
It's a powerful example. Really shows how you can make significant change even when you're dealing with a major setback just by focusing on those consistent small gains.
It's proof that slow and steady really can win the race.
Exactly.
Mm.
And he uses this thing he calls the 1% rule to kind of drive that point home.
Oh, yeah, the one where if you get 1% better every day, you end up drastically ahead of someone declining by the same amount over a year.
That's it.
It really hits you how much our daily choices matter, even if they seem small in the moment.
Absolutely. Those seemingly insignificant daily choices can really determine our trajectory. Now, one of the most interesting things Claire does is challenge our obsession with goals. He actually says we should just forget about them.
What? Really?
Yeah. Focus on systems instead.
So wait, aren't goals kind of the whole point? I mean, they give us something to aim for, right?
Yeah, they do. But Clear argues that being solely goal-oriented can actually be counterproductive. Think about it. If you're constantly fixated on that finish line, are you ever really enjoying the journey?
I see what you mean. It's like you're always putting off happiness until you reach some arbitrary milestone.
Exactly. And that can lead to a lot of dissatisfaction. But if you shift your focus to building the right systems, the results kind of take care of themselves, and the process itself becomes more fulfilling.
It's like that quote from the book, fix the inputs and the outputs will fix themselves.
There you go.
It's like when you're building a house,
Yeah.
if you've got a solid foundation, the rest kind of falls into place.
I like that analogy. And speaking of building things,
Yeah.
Clear goes deep into how habits are basically intertwined with our identity.
Okay, yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. It's like he's saying that our habits are actually a reflection of who we believe we are.
Right. So if you see yourself as a healthy person, you're going to do things that align with that. But if you're constantly battling against your own self-image, it's going to be way harder to stick to those healthy habits.
So real change has to start with how we see ourselves. Not about just forcing ourselves into these behaviors, but aligning them with who we believe we are.
That's the essence of it. True behavior change starts with identity change. It's a pretty powerful shift in perspective.
Definitely. So once we've kind of got that down, then we need to understand how habits actually form. Like, what are the steps involved?
Exactly. Because once you understand the rules of the game, you can actually play it effectively. And Clear breaks this whole complex process down into these 4 simple stages: cue, craving, response, and reward.
Cue, craving, response, and reward. Got it.
And he uses a super simple example of seeing cookies on the counter.
Right. So the cookies are the cue. The craving is, wanting that sugary taste and feeling satisfied. The response is taking a bite. And the reward is that feeling you get afterwards, that pleasure. Okay, I see. It's simple, but it makes sense. Each stage is crucial, right? Like, if you take one away, the whole habit falls apart.
Exactly. Like, you can think of it like a chain. It's only as strong as its weakest link.
That makes sense. And so this framework gives us the ability to sort of analyze our own habits. Like, what triggers us? What cravings are driving our actions?
Yeah. What keeps us coming back for more?
Okay, so we've got the framework. But how do we actually use it to build better habits or break the bad ones? I mean, is there a plan?
That's where Clear's 4 laws of behavior change come in. He basically gives you a roadmap. It's not just theory, though. He lays out actual strategies for every stage of that habit loop.
Okay, let's break down these laws. What's the first one?
Make it obvious. So we're talking about making yourself aware of your habits and creating those cues to trigger the behaviors you want. It's about setting yourself up for success.
I've heard of implementation intentions, I think. Does that fit in here? Where you plan where and when you'll do something?
Absolutely. So, like, after I pour my morning coffee, I'll meditate for 1 minute.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And what's the next law?
Make it attractive. Now, we're not talking about superficial attractiveness here. It's more about making the habit appealing to you, something you actually want to do.
I bet habit stacking comes in here, right? Like where you pair a new habit with something you already enjoy.
You got it. It's like after I brush my teeth, I'll floss. You piggyback on an already established routine.
Right, right. Makes sense. Okay, so now I've got my cues and I'm feeling motivated. But sometimes just doing the thing is the hardest part.
I hear that. That's where make it easy comes in. The key is to reduce the friction.
Oh, I definitely need help with this one. Starting is always the hardest part for me.
It's a common struggle.
Yeah.
So think about things like prepping your environment, like lay out your workout clothes the night before, remove distractions when you need to focus, or keep healthy snacks handy. Just little things that remove those mental barriers.
Makes sense. If it's easy to start, you're way more likely to do it. Okay, what's the last law?
Make it satisfying. This one's crucial. I mean, who wants to do something that feels like a chore?
No one. We all want those good habits to feel good, right?
Right. It's about making those good habits enjoyable, something you actually look forward to. Like, use a habit tracker maybe so you can see your progress, or reward yourself in ways that align with your values. Celebrate those small wins.
It's funny, we get so caught up in avoiding the bad stuff, we forget to make the good stuff feel good too.
Exactly. And remember, our brains are wired to seek pleasure and avoid pain. So if a habit is unsatisfying, we're just less likely to stick with it, even if we know it's good for us.
Okay, so we've covered a lot, from tiny gains to these 4 laws, and how our own identity plays a role in shaping our habits. It's fascinating how much control we actually have.
It is, and it's empowering. But we've really just scratched the surface here.
There's so much more to uncover in Atomic Habits, especially when you think about how things like our environment, our social circles, and even technology come into play. It's not just about willpower. It's about creating a whole ecosystem that supports our goals.
I think that's a great way to put it.
All right, so we're back, ready to keep digging into Atomic Habits. Last time, we were talking about how those tiny changes can really add up and how our habits are tied to our sense of self. But Clear doesn't stop there. He goes on to talk about how much our environment shapes our behavior.
Yeah, it's amazing how much we underestimate that, We like to think it's all about willpower.
Right. But our surroundings really do influence us in all sorts of ways.
Like, think about it. How many times have you blamed yourself for procrastinating when it was really that pile of clutter on your desk that was the problem?
All the time.
Exactly. Clear even uses this analogy. He says our environment is like this invisible hand, kind of shaping our behavior without us even realizing it.
It makes you think, right?
He talks about all this research that shows, like, people in walkable neighborhoods tend to get more exercise.
Oh, interesting.
It's not just about personal motivation, but also about the context.
So it's like setting yourself up for success, right?
Yeah.
By creating an environment that actually supports the habits you want.
Exactly. And he calls it environment design. So it's not about just changing yourself, but changing your surroundings too.
Okay, so what are some practical ways to do that?
Well, one thing is to make the cues for good habits more obvious.
How do you do that?
Like if you want to read more, put a book on your pillow every morning.
You literally wake up to it. I like
Yeah,
that.
you remove that first hurdle of even having to go find a book.
That's clever. What other strategies does he talk about?
Well, another one is gradually changing your context. So if you're trying to build new habits in the same place where old habits exist, it's going to be a lot harder.
Makes sense. It's like trying to quit smoking in the bar where you always used to light up.
Exactly. You're already wired to associate that place with the old habit. Right. So it's about breaking those associations. And you can do that by creating like dedicated spaces for different activities, a workspace, a reading nook, a place to exercise.
Oh, that's smart. It's like giving your brain those clear signals about what you're supposed to be doing.
Right. No more trying to work from the couch.
Where you also watch TV.
Yeah, that's not going to work.
And if you can't physically change your environment, you can just rearrange your current one, just to create those distinctions.
This reminds me of that study he talks about in the book, the one in Pakistan about hand washing.
Oh, yeah.
They found that just providing soap wasn't enough to get people to wash their hands more often.
Interesting.
But when they put the soap and water in a more visible spot, hand washing rates went way up.
It's amazing how these subtle things can really make a difference.
It shows how much we're on autopilot, just responding to our surroundings without even realizing it.
Right, so being intentional about your environment is crucial.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? Like, it seems like a lot to completely overhaul your whole space. Well, you don't have to do it all at once. Just start by becoming more aware of how your environment is affecting your habits right now. Like, what are the friction points? What's triggering those unwanted behaviors?
Okay, I see. So you're basically like an architect of your own behavior.
That's a great way to put it.
And speaking of influence, Clear also talks about how our social circles can really impact our habits.
Oh, yeah. We are social creatures after all.
All right. We're constantly picking up on cues from the people around us.
And he says we tend to adopt the habits of the people we spend the most time with without even realizing it.
So we should choose our friends wisely.
It can definitely help. Clear outlines these three groups that we tend to imitate: the close, the many, and the powerful.
Okay, break that down for me.
So the close, those are our family and friends, our inner circle.
The people we're most comfortable with.
Right. Makes sense that their habits would rub off on us.
So, like, if your family always cooks healthy meals together, you're probably more likely to do the same. But if your friends are all couch potatoes,
Yeah, could go the other way too. Then we have the many, which is more about the broader social norms of the groups we belong to. Like what's considered normal or desirable.
so it's like that unwritten dress code at a new job.
Exactly. You want to fit in, so you adapt.
I get it. What are the powerful?
Those are the people who have achieved a certain level of status or success. We tend to look up to them.
Oh, yeah, like those celebrity workout routines or how successful CEOs start their day. We're drawn to that.
Right. We see them as models and we unconsciously start mimicking their behaviors.
So if we want to change our habits, it sounds like surrounding ourselves with the right people is a good first step.
It can definitely help. And Clear suggests if you're in a group that's not really aligned with your goals, you can seek out new communities. Find people who share your values.
It's like building a support system.
Exactly. Having those people around can be super motivating.
And of course, we can't forget about the role of technology.
Oh, yeah. Technology is a huge one.
It can be such a double-edged sword when it comes to habits. It really can.
We can use it to automate good habits,
Yeah.
but it can also be a source of all those distractions.
Right. Like you can set up automatic bill pay so you never miss a payment,
Oh.
or use calendar reminders to schedule workouts.
It's like having a personal assistant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then you have the endless scrolling on social media, those constant notifications.
Oh, don't get me started on the notifications.
Yeah, and the temptation to buy stuff you don't need.
So easy to get sucked in.
So it's really about being intentional with how you use technology, like use app blockers to limit time on certain websites, unsubscribe from those tempting email lists, turn off those notifications you don't really need.
It's about setting those boundaries.
Exactly. Make sure technology is serving you, not the other way around.
And this kind of leads into that idea of making our habit satisfying, because if it feels like a chore, we're less likely to do it right.
Totally. And remember, we talked about our brains craving pleasure and avoiding pain. So rewarding yourself for those good habits is really important. Like, give yourself a pat on the back for a job well done.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. Little rewards can be just as effective. Using a habit tracker, taking a relaxing bath, even just acknowledging your accomplishment.
It's about celebrating those little wins, not just focusing on the end goal.
Yeah.
Makes it more enjoyable.
Exactly.
But what about those habits where the payoff is way down the road, like saving for retirement?
Yeah. Those long-term goals can be tough.
Our brains like instant gratification.
Right. So Clearso suggests finding ways to add a bit of immediate pleasure to those habits that pay off later.
So maybe like listening to your favorite music while you exercise,
Mm.
or rewarding yourself with a healthy but delicious meal after a week of good eating.
Exactly. Make the process enjoyable so you're more likely to stick with it. And choose those rewards that align with your long-term goals.
Makes sense. So it's like this balance between enjoying the journey and keeping that long-term goal in mind.
Exactly. But, I think it's important to acknowledge that all this can feel overwhelming.
It's a lot to take in, for sure.
Right. Building new habits takes time and effort. There will be slip-ups along the way.
Yeah, definitely. It can be discouraging.
It's important to remember that. And Clear really emphasizes that we should focus on the process rather than just the outcome.
So like, don't obsess over the number on the scale. Focus on making healthy choices each day.
Exactly. Celebrate those small wins. And don't beat yourself up if you mess up sometimes.
And having someone to keep you accountable probably helps too, right?
Oh, yeah. Having a friend or a mentor to share your goals with and track your progress can make a huge difference.
Like a cheerleader in your corner.
Exactly. And if you don't have someone like that in your life, you can always join an online group or something.
This has been so insightful. I mean, it's really amazing how much control we actually have when we understand these things.
It is empowering,
And
right?
it's not about making these drastic changes overnight. It's those small, consistent actions.
Exactly. Those are the ones that add up over time.
Okay, well, we're about to head into the final part of our deep dive. Things are about to get even more interesting.
I think so. We'll be talking about finding those habits that really play to your strengths. And we'll be getting into the surprising power of boredom.
Oh, that sounds intriguing. I can't wait to hear more about that. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into atomic habits, and I'm ready to unpack this whole idea of genes and habits. We touched on it briefly before, how our genes can kind of play a role in our strengths and weaknesses, but Clear's take on it is really interesting. He says we shouldn't view our genes as limitations.
Right. It's like they're more of a guide. They kind of help us figure out where our opportunities are.
So it's like instead of constantly trying to fix our weaknesses, we lean into our strengths.
Exactly. Work smarter, not harder. Right.
Exactly. So how do we do that? I mean, sometimes it's hard to even know what your strengths are.
Yeah, well, Clear talks about this. He says we should look for those habits, those activities, where progress feels easy, where you kind of just naturally excel.
So it's like finding those things that you're good at and that you enjoy.
Right. It's like finding that flow state,
Yeah.
where you get so absorbed in what you're doing that time just disappears.
Oh, yeah. I love when that happens. But what about the things we have to do that don't come naturally? Are we just doomed to struggle?
Well, we all have those, right? Clear acknowledges that, yeah, there are going to be tasks that we just don't enjoy or that we aren't good at, but he suggests breaking those tasks down.
Into smaller steps.
Exactly. So instead of looking at this big, scary project, you break it into little chunks that feel more manageable.
Like how to eat an elephant.
One bite at a time.
There you go. Okay, that makes sense. And then Clear brings up this other fascinating point about the power of boredom.
Oh, yeah.
He says, being able to handle the monotony of practicing something over and over again, that's what separates the good from the great.
It's so true. Think about like those elite athletes or musicians. They train for hours doing the same drills. It's not always fun, but that's how they get so good.
Right. So it's about being willing to put in the work, even when it's not exciting.
Exactly. But how do we actually do that? Like, how do we stay motivated when that initial excitement wears off?
Well, Clear suggests trying to make the process itself more enjoyable, even if the task isn't inherently fun.
Okay, so like listen to music while you work.
Yeah, or turn it into a game,
Mm-hmm.
or find a way to make it social, anything to kind of keep it engaging.
Makes sense. And then Clear also talks about the importance of reflection. He calls it reflection and refinement, basically taking a step back to evaluate what's working and what's not.
So it's like checking in with yourself to see if you're still on track. And if you're not, make some adjustments.
Right. You got to be willing to tweak things as you go along.
Like fine-tuning a recipe.
Exactly. Clear even suggests like scheduling these regular review sessions, maybe once a month or once a quarter.
That's a good idea, to really sit down and think about your habits.
Yeah. And you can also get feedback from other people, like a coach, a mentor, or even a friend.
Sometimes it's hard to see things objectively when you're so close to it.
Right. An outside perspective can be really helpful.
Okay, well, this has been incredible. I mean, it's really given me a whole new way of thinking about habits.
Me too. Clear really gives us the tools to understand how habits work.
And how to make real, lasting change.
It's all about those small, consistent actions.
Exactly. It's been a fantastic deep dive. And we'll be back soon with another one. But in the meantime, what one habit are you going to work on? How can you make it obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying to stick with? Thanks for listening.